Hello, welcome back to Amber Unabridged. Today I'm going to be talking about my February wrap-up. I figure it's almost the end of March, so it's about time. I'm going to try not to elaborate on these too much because there are many. If you are curious to know more about any of them, just let me know. I can do a full review or just kind of talk to you about it. Alright, so the first book that I finished in February was The Color of Earth by Kim Dong-hwa. That was a manhwa, which is essentially the Korean equivalent of manga, which is more commonly heard of in these parts. It was about a girl and her mom and growing up. It's definitely a historical fiction. I'm not exactly sure what the time period was, but it was really interesting, and there's 2 more books. It's part of a trilogy. I am interested in checking those out at some point. The next book that I finished was Monstrous by Marjorie Lee. First of all, the art by Sana Takeda is beautiful. I loved the art in that comic. But the story, it was stop and go. There'd be a lot of nothing. They're not telling you anything. Stuff is happening and you're like, okay, what is this? And then all of a sudden they would just dump a bunch of info on you at one point. And it was a little back and forth and jarring. I wasn't super crazy about that one. I probably should have gone and pulled all of these before I started filming. The next book that I finished was The Tea Dragon Society by Katie O'Neill. I love this book. I love it so much. For Christmas, my friend got me a card game called The Tea Dragon Society, and it said that it was based off of the book. And I was like, what? There's a book? And all of the dragons, the little tea dragons, are so cute. And I love dragons, and I love tea, and it's super adorable. And so I was like, okay, well, I have to find this book. I got it from the library, and I read it, and I immediately went and bought myself a copy, and I bought a copy for my nephew for his birthday because I just loved it so much. It's it's inclusive, and it's got representation and for LGBT, for disabled individuals. The art's just really cool in general. So I needed a copy so I could read it whenever I want and lend it out to everybody all the time. Yeah, I can't recommend it highly enough. It's wonderful. The next book that I finished was Fables Volume 2, Animal Farm by Bill Willingham. I really liked it. I'm digging this series so far. I've only read the first 2 volumes, but it's enjoyable. I liked this one. It was set on a farm where all of the fables who can't fit into human society live, so that there's not like this mass panic, and they're kind of immortal, I guess. But I really liked it. It was really well done, and there's a tiger on the cover. The next book that I read was Herding Cats by Sarah Anderson. Her comics, I've seen them all over Facebook, and she gets me. The next book that I read in February was Girls of Paper and Fire by Natasha Nan. I'm not sure if I'm saying her name right. I participated in the BookTube games in February, and that was Team Neverland's group book, and I was on Team Neverland, and so I read it. It was good. It was interesting. I have no real interest in reading the next book in the series. Yeah, I really need to get a move on. The next book that I read was Mr. Fox by Helen Oyeyemi. It was this guy, Mr. Fox, and Mary Fox. No relation. It went through a bunch of fictional scenarios with the 2 of them kind of playing off of each other and teaching each other things. It turns out that Mary Fox is actually a fictional person. She's Mr. Fox's muse. She's somebody he just made up. It was a little hard to follow at first, but it was really interesting. The next book I read was The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. I finally got on that train, and oh boy, did that take me for a ride. If you are one of the few left who have not read The 7 Husbands of Evelyn Hugo, go find it. It's about this famous Hollywood star, just her life, and she was married to 7 men. It's great. It has really great representation. It shows you that people are people. You know, a protagonist doesn't have to be perfect to be rooted for. and that everybody has flaws and you just have to take the bad with the good sometimes. It was a really good book. The next book that I read in February was Black Enough, compiled by E.B. Zeboy. It's a collection of fictional short stories about Black teens in America. And I really loved this anthology. I can't even begin. It was really good, and I highly recommend that everyone read it. The next book that I read in February was American Vampire Volume 2 by Scott Snyder and Raphael Albuquerque. I think I saw it on a list somewhere, and it looked interesting. And it was. And it's about a new breed of vampire that there's vampires, different breeds coming from different parts of the world, and they develop differently, and it's about this new breed of vampire that is unique to America. It's interesting. And so I read Volume 2, and at some point I will get Volume 3. The next book that I read in February was Chew, Volume 1, Taster's Choice, by John Layman and somebody else. I did a full review of this book, which I can link down below. I really enjoyed it a lot. It was a lot of fun. It was weird. The next book that I read was An Irish Country Christmas by Patrick Taylor, which is the third book in the Irish Country series. I did a full review of An Irish Country Doctor, which is the first book in the series, and I can link that down below as well. The third one wasn't my favorite, but it was fine. It was alright. It was cool. The next book that I read was At the Bottom of the River by Jamaica Kincaid. It just didn't pull me in. And that sucks because I've heard the author mentioned a bunch of times. So I'm going to try to read something else by her at some point. Hopefully I'll have more of a response. The next book that I read was Descender Volume 1, Tin Stars by Jeff Lemire. It was really cute. I liked the art in that one a lot. The story was good. It's a sci-fi comic. It's about this artificial intelligence who is supposed to be a companion to a real human child, and some things go awry and he loses his humans due to stuff. So it's very emotional. I might read more. I'm not in any hurry to, but it was enjoyable. And the next book that I finished was Becoming by Michelle Obama. I love that book. It's amazing. Everybody should read it. Everybody who loves her should read it. Everybody who hates her should read it. Everybody who thinks they know anything about her should read it, because you probably don't. It's really good. Next book I finished was An Unkindness of Ghosts by Rivers Solomon. I really enjoyed this book. It's a sci-fi. It takes place on a spaceship. There's a lot of representation in this book. It's really good. It's a little hefty. It's a big one. I highly recommend checking it out. If you're into sci-fi and you're looking for diversity, it's a really good book to read. The next book that I read in February was Kindred, the graphic novel adaptation, adapted by Damian Duffy and John Jennings, based off the novel by Octavia Butler. I don't like it as much as the novel. I know with adaptations, you always have to make some compromises. It doesn't seem like there's anything left out, but I noticed. It's still a really good adaptation. If you are a comic person and not necessarily a novel person, it's still a really great way to experience the story. I'm not a huge fan of the art style. It's a little jarring. There's a lot of sharp edges that I'm not super crazy about. I like the colors used, but not necessarily the designs of the people. The settings, places, buildings, scenery, those I thought were really well done. And I really love the cover without the sleeve. It's absolutely gorgeous. I think it's worth taking a look at. I still prefer the novel. The novel is better. The next book that I read was Pride by E.B. Zeboy. This is a retelling of Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, set in Harlem, I think, and it takes place with modern African-American teenagers instead of 18th century gentry folk in Regency England. I still prefer the original just because it's one of my favorite books and probably my favorite classic. but I thought it was really well done. And between that and Black Enough, I'm very interested in reading some more by E.B. Zeboy. I was trying to read books by African American authors or by African authors over the course of February, but of course I can't stick to one thing for an extended period of time. I get distracted easily. So I took a hard left at that point and went straight for Jane Austen-y type stuff. And I finally read a book that I had owned for years. And it was Confessions of a Jane Austen Addict by Lori Vieira Rigler. It piqued my interest because it was about modern woman living in LA or whatever. She's a Jane Austen fan, and I don't know, something man-related happened. And then all of a sudden she wakes up and everyone's like, oh, Miss whatever, and she's like, why are you speaking with British accents? What's going on? She finds that she's speaking with a British accent, and it turns out that she's just in this body of this woman in the 18th century in England. And it was kind of a cool premise, but I really didn't like the way that it was executed. There's no actual real answers at all. There's no resolution. Nothing makes sense, and I just didn't like it. I didn't DNF it. I wanted to finish it, but by the end, I was so over it, I unhauled that book so fast. So then, because after that, and I was still kind of in the mood, and I was like, well, this was garbage and didn't actually satisfy my Jane Austen craving, I decided to read Sense and Sensibility. I've tried starting this book probably about 3 times in the past. For some reason, I just couldn't ever get past the beginning of it. Both of the movie adaptations of it that I'd seen are really, really good, but reading it wasn't as lovely as reading any of her other books, of which I still have to read 3. And then all the other ones all over again, all the time, nonstop, forever and ever. All right, this one I'm going to read directly from here because there are a lot of things and I'm not going to remember them. The next book I read was To Obama with Love, Joy, Anger, and Hope, compiled by Jeanne Marie Lascaux. I think I read that right. She's a journalist, and she basically talked about how when Obama was in office, he made it a point to read 10 letters every day, and it was about the whole process, how there was a whole office room dedicated to sorting through these letters and how they would make their way to the president or not. I really enjoyed it. It was insightful and educational. The next book that I read was Fruits Basket Volume 1 by Natsuki Takaya. I own that, but I'm not digging it out. I love Fruits Basket. It's a reread for me. I've been in a mood, and I love that series so much. The next book that I read was Octavia's Brood, Science Fiction Stories from Social Justice Movements by Adrienne Marie Brown. These were all science fiction stories that had a social justice aspect. It's pretty much what it sounds like. It was good. It didn't grip me the way I was hoping that it would, but it was really interesting, and honestly, my favorite part was at the end when they were talking about Octavia Butler and her works and what she was hoping to accomplish with her literature and her life. And I love her, and she's the best. The next 2 books that I read were Akata Witch and Akata Warrior by Nnedi Okorafor. I read her Binti trilogy last year and really enjoyed it, and I'd kept seeing this around, and I thought, why not give it a shot? I loved it. It's amazing. It's a YA. I'm pretty sure it's YA. And there's, magic and Africa, and it's just really good, and you should read it. I highly recommend it. And then the last book that I read in February was Captera Volume 1, Fear Not, Tiny Alien by Chip Zdarsky. I really enjoyed it a lot. I'm pretty upset because there doesn't seem to be a Volume 2, and there really needs to be, and that's very upsetting. Anyway, that is my February wrap-up. Have a great time reading. Bye.